Today I want to talk to you guys about lightning in a bottle albums. This idea of a lightning in a bottle album, for me personally, is an album where a spirit, an energy, or a feeling is captured, maybe amongst the album itself or how you feel listening to it, that the artist can't replicate ever again. For many reasons. Perhaps it's the topic or the concept that's discussed within the album. Perhaps it's the sound of the music. Perhaps the artist has tried to replicate it again, but they can't capture that same feeling again. Or perhaps they've gone on to something completely different, but yet that lightning lives in that album. And no matter how many more albums come out after it, that's still the one that feels different. It gives you just a different feeling that you can't get from the artist in anywhere else. This is not to be mistaken with a one-hit wonder or a one-album wonder. I think that's a different thing, perhaps a separate topic for another video. That implies that there's only one successful album amongst the artist's catalogue, or there's only one album that's good in the artist's catalogue. In the case of Lightning in a Bottle album, I think for me, the artist could have many good albums or many great albums, but yet that one album just feels different. You know what I mean? If you know what I mean, stick around and let me talk you through 5 that I think fit this bill. And let me know in the comments what you think of my picks. Let me know what your picks would be. And as ever, make sure you're subscribed, following for more content as well. And yeah, let's get on with it. I think a great place to start is Melodrama by Lorde. I think this perfectly captures the idea, the essence of a Lightning in a Bottle album. I just don't think there's a way you could ever get an album from her like this again. It's incredibly specific. It's youthful in a way that makes it really feel clear that, you know, a late teenager, early 20-year-old person was writing these songs. It's just got something about it that makes it feel like the artist couldn't possibly do this again. And in the case of Lorde, I think her first album doesn't try to do this. And honestly, in terms of quality, you could argue that the first album is not that far off Melodrama, in my opinion anyway. I think they're pretty close in terms of quality. But then beyond this album, I would argue Virgin was sort of slightly kind of trying to do this again, just in a more alternative pop way and more of like a singer-songwriter vibe on that album. You could hear with some of the tracks where, like, you know, the choruses are trying to be anthemic, they're trying to capture that spirit, and yet everything just feels like it pales in comparison to Melodrama. So I think in this case, the artist has tried in a sort of thereabouts way to make it again. But even immediately after this album, we got a completely different sound and vibe from Lorde that kind of made you feel like, yeah, she was making it clear that she wanted to make something different for her fans, and Solar Power is nothing like it. But Melodrama just has this essence within the music, the way the emotions are poured out, the writing, the vocals, everything about it feels so emotive that I just don't think, even if Lorde went through an incredibly heartbreaking breakup again, like, I just don't think you could hear her do this, really. I just don't think there's a world where this album could be replicated. It's just got a spirit to it. It's got this really youthful vibe that clearly very young people, when this album came out, if you were young, you very heavily related to this. I don't know if she could make that again. On a completely different plane to what I was just talking about there, I'm going to go next with Yeezus by Kanye West. You see where I'm going here? Like, again, that is a very Lightning in a Bottle album. That is an album that you could only do in a very specific headspace, in a very specific time of your life, that even Kanye, as manic and as wild as the things he says now, he couldn't make this again. He couldn't capture this again. You would think, listening to this album, it was obvious where he'd end up going with the frigging crazy stuff he comes out with, and yet it wasn't. That's how much of a Lightning in a Bottle album this is. This feels so specific, so unachievable, unattainable to make again. And if he tried it, it would probably be an embarrassment. I mean, everything he's putting out these days is an embarrassment, but I think it would be a real embarrassment if he tried making this album again. But he won't capture this. You can't make this again. You can't have that Chief Keef verse again. You just can't. You can't do it. You could try, but you can't make a second New Slaves. The music and the way he's rapping and the way his like vibe and his aura is kind of just coming through is so like one of one on this album, to the point where like the obvious influences that are coming through, you know, the experimental hip hop that he was very clearly trying to channel at the time, it's not exactly like a Death Grips album, but you can clearly see that that was where he was pulling from. Or Dialect or Shabazz Palace. Is like, he might not necessarily specifically name those artists, but I think those influences really had to come first before you could get to this. And yet still, this album is one of one. Even in his own catalogue, there is nothing like this. Amongst mainstream rappers of the 2010s, of today, of the 2000s, of the 90s, there is no way you could get an album like this. This is a lightning in a bottle album to the very core. There is no way you can make an album like this again. This is so specific to itself. Now, this next pick does cross over a little bit with the idea of it also being a one album wonder, which I did say at the start of the video I wanted to stray away from. I wanted to be very clear that this is not that video. But I think it also crosses into a lightning in the bottle album too. And that is DJ Shadow's Introducing. I mean, I can't believe I had to sit through Our Pathetic Age in 2019. And the thought of sitting through that album again pains me. I could see what he was trying to go for there, but it fell flat on its face. And Introducing is truly, again, kind of like Yeezus, one of a kind in its own real existence and the artist's discography, but also really one of a kind in the world of this genre, where it feels like, yeah, you could say this album is influenced by it, this artist is trying to capture that, but this album and the beats and the feeling you get listening to these instrumentals feels so separate to anything else of this genre that it feels like DJ Shadow is probably constantly chasing that feeling again. Even if he's not trying to make the same album, I think he wants to make something that gives his audience that same feeling listening to it. And I just feel as though you can't do it again. It's so of its time, but yet it's aged beautifully as well. Like, there are so many things about this album that just make it so special, and yet I think it feels as though other hip-hop producers could try to replicate this, but I don't think they could. Rumours, Fleetwood Mac. I think this is a good example of a lightning in a bottle album too. I think very clearly with how the band were interacting with one another at the time, how they were going through very specific things with one another at the time, makes this album very clearly an album you couldn't make again. That tension, that raw emotion, to the point where apparently they weren't even able to properly get on with each other unless they were just in the studio making music. Outside of that, they really struggled to interact and engage, you know, politely and comfortably with each other. That makes this album so unlike anything else I think the band could ever try making. You can't recreate those feelings. You can't recreate that tension that you're, you know, going through again, because once that emotion's gone and you've, you know, 2 years have passed and maybe you've moved on, 3 years have passed, 4 years have passed, you're onto something else, that feeling is forgotten, or that feeling is a memory now. Like, you can't then try and make that song in the studio. And while it's very obvious that, you know, everybody always talks about where Rumours was birthed from, and everybody knows that, you know, oh, they were all writing songs about each other, and that's what makes the album special. Like, yeah, I know that's obvious, but thinking about it even further, beyond this, the band couldn't make an album like this again. I don't think you can make a Dreams again, to be honest. Like, that's an amazing track that's lived on for decades, and a new generation fell in love with it a few years ago, and it became even more popular than it ever was. Like, you just can't make a song like that again, let alone The Chain, let alone Go Your Own Way. Like the whole album just feels so unique to itself and so unique to the 70s that, yeah, I think it's pretty hard to imagine any band really trying to capture the spirit that this album has, even musically as well. Like, it's pulling from blues that was really popular at the time, the blues rock era. It's also kind of pushing a little bit forward as well to kind of like the upbeat poppy stuff that was emerging in the 80s as well. Like, it just feels like it exists in its own thing. That, yeah, it's very much a lightning in a bottle moment. More so, I would say, for the writing and the lyrics and what the band were going through at the time. I think it's more so that, but even musically, I think you could argue too. My fifth and final pick, which is also a 2017 album, funnily enough, is in fact Forced Witness by Alex Cameron. Now, with this one, again, we've had a few albums since to kind of build up a bank of what the artist has then tried to make again and again and again. And I think now you can look back 8 years later on this album and think, yeah, this feels very lightning in a bottle, really. The character he's playing, the caricature, I should even say, the wackiness to the lyrics, the silliness, the goofiness, the comedy, the humour. It's very clear that Alex Cameron hasn't tried doing this again. And it feels like, again, for me, the artist couldn't replicate this, really. Even if they wanted to, I think there would be huge backlash to this today. And not to say that there wasn't backlash at the time, although I will admit I don't really remember there being much. He wasn't that popular. But I think even now, given the fact that the way people responded to that Geordie Greep album that came out only, 2 years ago now, makes me think that, again, when you play a character in your music, sometimes some people just don't catch on to that. And sometimes it's really hard to sell it to the audience and get everybody to fully know what you're trying to go for. I understand that misinterpretations are there for a reason. It's not always easy to really, make everybody understand what you're trying to do with your music. I fully am aware with that. But I think even now, like, you couldn't really go as far as he does with the character that he's doing here, because I think a lot of people would just think he's perpetuating bad stereotypes or encouraging bad behavior. So yeah, I think there's just no way this album could be made again. It feels very one of a kind. Again, even amongst other artists, I don't know many other artists that have really ever made an album like this. But musically, it's an album that, again, I don't think he's quite been able to capture. It's got a really upbeat Heartland rock kind of 80s synth pop vibe crossover going on that he hasn't really able to do again. Just everything about it just feels so lightning in a bottle that I think we don't really have a way of having another album like this from the artist, or really many other artists out there, anytime soon. And that is it from me. That is going to be my picks for Lightning in a Bottle albums. I really enjoyed discussing this as a concept. I think it's really interesting. I think it's really unique to talk about, and there's probably another 100 albums you could name. So I want to see what you guys say in the comments, and maybe, again, as I always say with these types of videos, there's always room for a part 2. So if you want to stick around and see me do this again, let me know. And yeah, tell me your thoughts on my picks. What would your picks be? Subscribe if you haven't already. Have a good day, and goodbye.